Okay, so this is lecture number 17 on urban waters, where I am going to cover urban waters from the social sciences perspective, especially focusing on the historical and political ecological perspectives. Now, the thing is that we had discussed water in the rural context. We had also talked about little bit of urban waters when we talked about urban political ecology and urban political ecology in the political ecology lecture. But here I would elaborate on the same, because I very much think that within the recent era of the Anthropocene and within the recent context of urban sprawl and rapid urbanization that the world is encountering, it is very important for us to understand the complex realities that are going on within urban context, more specifically within the urban water context. Now, I will elaborate in this first slide that why I think discussion on urban waters is extremely important these days. If we go through this particular report of world urbanization prospects, then world urbanization prospects came up with the finding that since or from 2008, the demography or the population in the urban area would become equal to rural area, and this had actually happened. So, what has happened is that 2008 has become the landmark year where the urban population had actually surpassed the rural population, and now more people they inhabit urban areas than rural areas. So, this is a significant and landmark development with lot of impact on the environment or on the ecological footprint. So, what I am saying is that like urbanization prospect 2007, it says that urbanization is not a new phenomena, but what is a new phenomena these days is the rate, scale and shifting geography of urbanization. So, this shifting geography of urbanization is extremely important, because we can find growth of urban population especially in the global south, and this is very much loaded with water challenges. So, as the urban population is increasing, so the consumption pattern so far as of urban water is concerned is also shifting to a great extent, and not only consumption, but also we can understand abstraction and extraction of water within the urban context is also taking a rapid turn. So, with the shift in urban population, urban water challenges are becoming severe, where we can find how these water bodies and wetlands are getting converted at a rapid scale. So, there are a lot of problems, institutional glitch, technical setbacks, and abstraction is always there. So, so far as the supply of piped drinking water is concerned, groundwater table is replenishing at a faster rate, because urbanization is today the nature of urbanization. If we look into it, we will find that real estate speculation is a major trend within rapid urbanization or urban sprawl in the contemporary period. So, that is affecting the groundwater as well. And another very significant thing which I will actually elaborate in the next lecture is what is known as urbanization without infrastructure. So, this is another process where areas which were rural yesterday will actually become urban tomorrow. So, they are actually in the transition phase, and this transition phase is conceptualized within a connotation which is known as the peri-urbanization. So, and there are manifold challenges that people living in the margins of a city, people inhabiting the peri-urban space are encountering, especially so far as water provision and sewage water or sewage disposal treatment and all these things are concerned. So, this is what I accessed a few days back. It is a particular report called Integrated Urban Water Systems Challenges of Implementation, and here Neil Grigg draws our attention to what he calls double warming. So, what is this double warming? So, he says that both our world population and the percentage living in cities are rising. So, the area which he had already discussed in the previous slide. So, he emphasizes in the whole thing by saying that this double warming, it is actually compounding it is actually compounding pressure on urban water systems, and the outcome is rapidly escalating urban demands for water. So, that is leading to growing competition, conflicts, shortages, waste and degradation of water. This will become more clear when we we will look into the next slide, that actually brings out the relationship between urban and the environment. So, what I am going to say is that in the previous report, Integrated Urban Water Systems Challenges of Implementation, Neil Grigg pointed out that the problem or the challenge that we are facing today is relating to water services, because water services of a city, it depends on 3 or 4 very important things, very crucial things. So, which are these? These are potable water or safe drinking water, which is a primary requirement for all the citizens, for all the inhabitants of an urban area. Then the water services also to a great extent depends on adequate and convenient sanitation system, effective wastewater management, and also urban systems or services to a great extent it depends on effective drainage and flood control systems. Now, the question is, the current cities, are they able to provide the water services across all these parameters in an equitable or in a sustainable fashion? If not, if these systems are there, but still the scale is limited, if the systems are there, but they are not functioning well, then that would actually affect the health and the sustainability of the city. That is what Neil Grigg tried to point out in his report that we quoted previously. So, this is another diagram that talks about or that brings out the relationship between the urban and the environment, and one must understand that this relationship is actually not linear, but it is thickly loaded with power equations, power dynamics, political equations across multiple stakeholders, across a wide spectrum of people who are inhabiting the urban area and who are also affecting the environment. And the stakeholders include the state, the non-governmental organizations, the grassroots organizations, and most importantly the people. And there are many other stakeholders as well who are very much embedded into the whole system. So, why we are discussing urban water and why we are discussing urban waters from the social sciences perspective, especially historical and political ecological perspective, is that these perspectives or these framework will enable us to understand the complicated or the complex relationship between urban and environment by focusing into the power equations and politics and economic imperatives that to a great extent shape and determine the relationship between the urban and the environment. So, now I will come to the urban environmental history, which is the first part of this lecture, because it is divided roughly into 2 parts. So, where in the first part I am going to discuss the importance of urban environmental history, how urban environmental history can be considered as a very important or a valid lens or framework to understand the complex relationship between urban and ecology or urban and environment. On the other hand, I will discuss after urban environmental history, urban political ecology, and again I will point out that why urban political ecology is an important framework which can be applied to capture the complex realities so far as urban waters is concerned. So, first let us focus on urban environmental history. Now, to begin with, this particular field of urban environmental history, it is a very not very, but at least it can be regarded as a recent or an ongoing field of research. Because if you look into the previous works of social scientists, or for that matter even natural scientists, you will find that in the previous works or in previous urban literature and also environment literature, the relationship between city and nature was considered to be absolutely antithetical. So, it was understood. So, what happened is that the urban historians or urban scholars who used to study the city, they never talked about the environment, and vice versa, that is environmental scholars who actually studied ecological flows or that for that matter different other areas of environmental social sciences, they never considered urban within the ambit of the environment. So, there was a strict antithesis between city and nature, and it was perceived that city and nature, they are they diverge pathways. So, they do not converge, because urban is absolutely different from environment, and environment means pristine environment. So, only the environment should consist of topics related to farmlands, agricultural scapes, water bodies, and so on and so forth. So, we find a strict binary between urban and environment if we go through the entire spectrum or the entire array of social science literature for that matter. Now, what happened is that in the 1990s there was a very interesting debate between Donald Worcester, a very significant and renowned environmental historian, and Martin Melosi, who started working on cities, or who started working on the urban for that matter. Now, Donald Worcester, he wrote a piece in the 1990, and the name of the piece is Transformations in the Earth towards an agro-ecological perspective in history. So, you can understand from this name, agro-ecological perspective. So, he said that environmental history should only focus on, as I mentioned, only the environmental components, or for that matter the ecosystem resource, including farmlands, agricultural landscapes, forests, water bodies, etc. So, according to Donald Worcester, urban should never be a part of the environment, because urban is always manufactured, it is artificial for that matter. But this particular idea which Donald Worcester talked about in his 1990 piece was countered and critically interrogated by Martin Melosi, who pointed out that cities, they are also part and parcel of the bigger environment. So, one should consider city within, while one should consider changes or transformations within the larger environment as a whole. So, that is why Martin Melosi pointed out that urban is embedded within the bigger environmental ambit. So, urban, if one wants to know or understand the urban predicament, one has to see the larger processes that are going on even within the periphery of the urban. So, there is a whole lot of relationship between the urban and its environment, and Martin Melosi pointed out in few of his writings which he started publishing in the early 1990s. One very interesting piece is called The City and the Environment, and there Melosi, I think in 1993. So, we will circulate these reference materials to you. So, in that piece Melosi pointed out, and he tried to define and he tried to conceptualize what urban environmental history is all about. So, he said that urban environmental history, it combines the history of the city building process and the history of the relationship between city and nature and the combined relationship between the two. So, this is what is urban environmental history, as Melosi pointed out. So, yes, so Melosi talked about that urban environmental history, it actually combines the study of natural history of the city and the history of the city building process and the possible intersections between the two. This is a very important composite definition, where Melosi says that when one focuses on the history of the city, one cannot ignore the natural history of the city. That is the equation between the city and its wider environment in the making of the city. So, later in political ecology we will learn that how a city actually shares its relationship with its larger environment, and how that determines to a great extent the making, unmaking and remaking of the urban context for that matter. So, it is the study of the natural history of the city and also the history of the city building process and the possible intersections between the two. So, this is what all about urban environmental history, a brilliant reconceptualization and a composite understanding of urban environmental history, which we got during the 1990s when Melosi started focusing on what can be, how urban environmental history can actually evolve. And Melosi was joined by a number of other social scientists and historians, including Joel Tarr and there was already Cronon, William Cronon, who had focused on the history of Chicago. So, how Chicago had developed from its larger environmental infrastructure. So, these things so number of environmental historians, they started focusing on the city, and they started looking into the intersections between the natural history of the city and the history of city building process, and came up with very interesting history of evolution of cities and the functioning of cities by considering into the larger ecological equations that the cities are embedded with. So, this is a picture, I do not know of which city, I have no idea about the time frame, but I found this picture very interesting. And so, the question that I am going to throw in front of you is that by looking into the picture, whether you feel that Martin Melosi's argument could be validated or not. So, this is an exercise that you can think about. So, there is I have no clue, no idea about the time frame, no idea about the geographical space, but the only idea that it is a very interesting picture that gives us bits and pieces of information about many things. So, there so I will not elaborate, because this is an exercise for you. So, the exercise is by looking into the picture, you have to you have to just reflect on whether you are able to validate Melosi's argument or not, that is it. So, now coming to the more technical part of it. So, when we are saying that cities to a great extent depend on environment, or for that matter environment to a great extent shape the urban technicalities. So, what do we actually specifically mean? So, we are specifically talking about two very crucial things on which the survival of a city is dependent. So, what are these crucial things? In technical terms, it is called water in and water out. In very simple term, so from where the city derives its water and where it disposes its wastewater. So, these two things are very important and vital, because today, as we had also talked about Neil Grigg's write up. So, he has also mentioned that this particular thing of water in and water out mechanism is crucial for the vitality and sustainability and also longevity of the city. So, this we need to understand that from where the city actually receives water supply and how it actually has come up with the wastewater disposal or collection system. So, this entire mechanism of water in and water out, Martin Melosi and more importantly Joel Tarr, they try to conceptualize it in terms of what they call the invisible city. Now, why they call this the invisible city? Because there are series of weirs and networks and so many other technical things. So, an entire cohort of technical design that we sometimes are not able to see within the surface of the city, but that sometimes remain in the subsurface of the city. So, this is an entire invisible network sometimes, as I mentioned it is a complex system consisting of wires and so many other technical things that are vital for the sustenance of the city, but when you will encounter a city, sometimes you will not be able to see this system because often it remains underground. So, environmental historians, or one of the significant contribution of environmental history is that the environmental historians, they drew our attention to this part of a city, to this invisible component of a city on which the functioning of a city to a great extent remains. Yes. So, coming back to, if you keep in mind this water in water out, there are very other interesting nuances that this water in or water out or this invisible city actually consists of. So, I will try to explain it one by one, because I think this is crucial and these are the fundamental contribution of environmental historians, because students from the scientific background, from engineering background, they will come up with the understanding that see, we know water in water out. So, what is so historical about it? Why a historian has to explain what is water in water out? because we design this system, a civil engineer designs this system, an ecological expert or engineer designs this system. Now, how a historian or how a social scientist can actually contribute in this invisible component of the city, which is conceptualized in terms of water in and water out. So, these are the bullet points, these are the fundamental bullet points through which I am going to make or going to assert the contribution of urban environmental historians in making us understand the how this complex water in water out system actually works. So, let us take the first point, modern water works and sewage system, integrated system of water provision and wastewater disposal relating to urban cleanliness. We definitely have to go back to history to understand this. Now, in which part of the world actually first this so called modern water works and sewage system developed? It developed in the European capitals, and when? Roughly during the 19th century. And you will see that during the 19th century what happened is that the public the public health sector or the public health aspects were very much determined by a particular theory that was in vogue during that time, which is known as the miasma theory. So, what is this miasma theory? So, miasma theory is that during that time the Europeans became extremely anxious because they thought that the cities have to be kept clean, because many people were dying due to many reasons, different diseases were actually taking place, and the mortality rate in these European cities were quite high. And so, the Europeans they apprehended that in order to survive, in order to in order to increase their longevity, they have to keep their cities clean. So, they focused on two things. They thought that there should be a system through which the entire city can be cleaned. This is one, and secondly, there should be the water system, water supply should not be totally based on surface water. So, they understood that something needs to be done, or some kind of piped installed pipe drinking water system is very much required, through which they will be actually able to get a supply of fresh quality potable water. So, these two became priority, that is cleaning the city every day or for that matter frequently, and also getting access to piped drinking water. So, water will flow through the pipes. So, it should not be accessed directly from the surface water. So, these two things became priorities for the Europeans, and this is where actually they started designing what is known as modern water works. So, this piped water system and sewage disposal system, these were integrated as a whole, and these gave birth to what is known as modern water provision. Okay. Now, the interesting part is that this miasma thing and the 19th century thus led to the birth of these modern water works, but during that time the input and output consequences to a great extent were not weighed, were not considered. That is, so I again explain that. So, for example, now when you are shifting, so pipe drinking water means what? Pipe drinking water means you are getting household connection. So, you are getting household connection, and the women, more importantly, because women they are actually the water providers for family. This has been established in feminist ethnography as well. So, what happened? You do not need to travel, or you do not need to move from one distance to the other to fetch buckets of water. So, now you are getting public, or now you are getting household connection. Now, you are getting a connection privately. So, you have this modern bathroom amenities, you have flush toilets, and also there was lot of other scientific innovations which were made. For example, so far as these electronic appliances are concerned, like if you remember 19th, 20th century Europe, during this time we find not only flush toilet and modern bathroom amenities, but also dishwasher, washing machine. So, what happened is that, I mean, within a very small span of time, the domestic consumption of household, domestic water consumption of household, it rose manifold. So, it rose almost tenfold in Europe and also in the United States. So, previously while the water consumption was only 10 to 20 liters per person per day, so now it became 150 to 200 liters per person per day. So, you can see how technological different technological choices, shifting technological choices actually led to or actually affected the abstraction of water. That is the input side, which was unfortunately not considered when this modern water provision was being designed. So, these are the cultural things, these are the social aspects of the technical design, which were unfortunately not considered during that period of time. Not only that, there are other things like, for example, institutional and legal regulations. We have to keep in mind that this system, this modern water provision, it is a large system with fixed with fixed high fixed cost, very high fixed cost, because it requires huge amount of investment of capital money. So these systems is were large infrastructures which had high fixed cost but low variable cost. So what happened is that consumption to a great extent was stimulated by degressive tariff. What does that mean? It means the more you consume, the less you pay. So the more amount of units you consume, the less you pay. So what happens is that, so that is an incentive to the people. So the people started consuming more, because then they have to pay less. So this is the whole theory of degressive tariff. Now what was happening was that was definitely affecting the ecological footprint, that was definitely affecting the resource. So these are the multiple dimensions, the social cultural dimensions, the institutional legal regulations, and all these input output aspects and consequences that became embedded with the modern water works, which were not very much considered during that time, because during that time only the technicalities, but not the social, political, institutional, legal aspects were actually considered. Yes, so I just want to discuss two works here, very prominent, very interesting works of urban environmental history. One is by Sabine Ballast, and you should keep in mind that Sabine Ballast is, so Sabine Ballast is a civil engineer by training, but Ballast studied the urban metabolism of Paris. And not only urban metabolism of Paris, but the history of urban metabolism. So he focused on the archival sources, and he started studying urban metabolism of Paris by focusing on the 19th century. So, being an expert in the civil engineering, having expertise in civil engineering, Ballast and his team, entire research team, they actually quantified water flows of 19th century Paris, and they found out that the natural scientists and the economists of that period of the 19th century, they were extremely aware about the reuse and recycling value of waste. So to a great extent they actually concentrated on material cycles of waste, which was so very important. But unfortunately Ballast shows by tracing the entire historical conjecture that this scene of 19th century, it actually transformed and shifted during the 20th century, when there was this breakdown of material cycles, and Ballast and his team lamented that since the 20th century waste ceased to be a resource. So this is one, and the second one is a very fascinating work by Simon Neri-Sarneri. So Sarneri has worked on the canal network of the city of Milan, Italy, and Neri-Sarneri has shown that how previously the city's canal system, which were maintained since the traditional period of time, which were maintained since the ancient times, how this canal system was an extremely vibrant resource, which played a very crucial part in trade and transportation, and also waste disposal, and also the canals played an important part in irrigating the nearby agricultural fields. Then Neri-Sarneri argues that after a particular point of time there was a rise in urban population. So, there was a demographic change in demographic profile and change in the demography of Milan, and so the sanitary situation actually deteriorated, and so this traditional canal system was replaced by modern provision and sewage system. But unfortunately, the scientists, they did not consider, or the planners, they actually did not consider that this superimposition was not to a great extent able to absorb organic pollutant substances. So, what was the result? The result was the entire collapse of these traditional regional hydrological regime, and the agricultural fields also to a great extent became polluted. So, why I am discussing these two works? Because these two works to a great extent help us understand that how a long term view, or how if we trace the, or if we understand a city, or if we try to understand how this modern water provision and how waste water treatment or waste versus disposal mechanisms evolved in a particular city, and how these had affected the functioning of the city, then we will be able to understand, or will be able to identify the specific challenges and potentials that a city offer, which is vital for understanding the parameters of a sustainable city. So, this is an interesting argument by Ramchandra Guha long back in 2005. So, it's the title of this particular piece is also very remarkable. It is called "What's Next for Environmental History." So, in 2005 he was thinking what is next for urban environmental history, and he brilliantly captured that urban has to be included within environmental history, because keeping in mind the contemporary conjecture of urbanization. So, he says urban environment is neglected by activists. So, as we know that, as I mentioned, that city and nature, they shared antithetical kind of a relationship. So, in South Asian, or in more specifically Indian environmental history also, urban was neglected to a great extent, because South Asian environmental history also consisted of the history of forests and water bodies and all that, but not urban for that matter. So, what he says is that the urban environment is neglected by activists, by scholars as well. So, India soon will have the largest urban population in the world, and this is already the case. So, yet we know far less than we ought to about the history of ecological conditions, the history of ecological condition within cities, or of their claims on the resources of the hinterland. So, he also brings in the question of the hinterland, that is a relationship between the urban and its wider ecological infrastructure. So, then he is hopeful, because he says we will soon have fine detailed studies of the cities of modern India from the environmental perspective, and this is what we are trying to do. One of my lectures on the blue infrastructures of Kolkata, on the canals and wetland system of Kolkata from a temporal historical perspective, will to an extent, I think, accomplish this particular dream of Ramchandra Guha, that we will soon have fine detailed studies. And yes, we are having fine detailed and sophisticated studies of water bodies or environment within urban contexts. So, this is I am sorry, a little long lecture, and I will like to devote some more time in it, because I want to concentrate on political ecology as well. So, so once you are clear with urban environmental history and the several important aspects that urban environmental history had brought to the table, now we will focus on a little bit on urban political ecology, maybe for the next 10 minutes, and then we will finally wrap up. Yeah, so again a last slide on urban environmental history, 2 or 3 works, because in the last slide I talked about this Ramchandra Guha's dream about will soon have. So, we are having, because I cited my case study on Kolkata's canal. I also want to cite few other case studies, 1 or 2 are only there. So, one is by Michael Mann. So, Michael Mann focused on what he calls Delhi's belly. So, if you remember, water in, water out, invisible city. So, belly, the meaning of belly. So, Delhi's belly. So he sheds light on the sanitary situation or sanitary condition of Delhi, and he brings in a very interesting unexplored aspect by saying that during the colonial times, when this modern sanitation system was developed, then there was a certain racial component to it as well. That is, he clearly shows that how these Britishers, they actually differentiated between old Delhi and New Delhi, and New Delhi they came up with a very composite or comprehensive kind of a modern sanitary system or sanitation system, but old Delhi lacked from the facilities of modern sanitation. So, this is his core argument, and followed by a book, very recent book by Janine Wilhelm, sorry. So, and the book is called Environmental Pollution in Colonial India, and she focuses on the Ganges and more importantly the sewerage technologies of Ganges. This is a fascinating publication, because if we look into the reason that why rivers are being polluted, if we just also focus on Ganga, then the mainstream argument is that the Ganga started getting polluted after the post-independent period, since the post-independent period, because there was a heavy economic development, and and there were heavy industries that were coming up on the banks of the Ganges, and so all these river cities, so the cities on the bank of the Ganges to a great extent were polluting the Ganges. So, there was both there were both point and non-point source pollution, that is pollution from agriculture and pollution from industry, especially since the post-independent period. Now, Wilhelm counters this argument and says that no, the pollution actually started during the colonial period as well, because her argument is that as the colonizers, they were very much to a great extent they were bound by this colonial ideology of fiscal restrictions. So, they introduced cheapest sanitation technologies, sewerage technologies on these various river cities on the banks of the Ganges, which to a great extent led to massive pollution. So, you can see by looking into history that how river pollution in the Ganges actually started since the colonial period only, and to a great extent shaped by and determined by political economic imperatives of the colonial. So, it is not only a post-independent phenomena, but it is also a colonial phenomena, a particular kind of a view that only an environmental historian can actually give you. And as I had mentioned, my study on canals and wetlands of Kolkata, which I will elaborate in one of my lectures. So, no need to elaborate on this right now. Yeah. So, very quickly coming to urban water political ecology of water. So, what is this? This is actually, these are the 2 or 3 basic ideas, basic things that we need to keep in mind. The first is a question, an interrogation. Does only water flow through pipes? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. This is a deeper question which will help us observe lot of things which we are unable to observe otherwise. So, does only water flows through pipes, or there are other things that also flow, including of course power. So, it is not only water that flow through pipes, but it is also power that actually flows through pipes. So, I will explain, and political ecology of water is that framework which enable us to understand that it is not only this H2O that flow through the pipes, but it is also the power or the way these water pipes are distributed in different parts of the city, that way the water pipes are laid out in various parts of the city through which the cities actually access pipe drinking water. This is to a great extent loaded with political equations, power nexus. And who gains and who loses? This is another thing which we need to ask, that who gains by this kind of a distribution system, or by the kind of access that the city achieves. So, which segment of population actually can be termed as gainers, and which segment of population actually be termed as losers. So, these are the things that we need to concentrate on. So, political ecology of water is all about uneven, unequal and unjust, 3 very key terms. It is all about uneven, unequal and unjust distribution of water infrastructures and of course water for that matter. So, yes, it is about uneven waterscapes, and in political ecology lecture we had talked about Eric Singedu. So, here again reference by Singedu. So, Singedu and his team to a great extent they had focused on potable water and they had focused on water quantity. Now, interesting, so uneven distribution of infrastructures and water quantity. So, quantity is the key term here, but now political ecology of water had also advanced and moved beyond quantity to take into account, to take into consideration also water quality. So, we had I think discussed about Ruska's works of 2017 when he talked about political ecology, that how Ruska says that how Ruska actually establishes the link between power equations, politics, physiochemical and microbiological contamination in the in one of the African cities. Yes. So, coming quickly, actually this is a big jump which ideally should not have been done, but then I have no option. So, it is important for us to understand the urban water political ecology as a framework and how in India the few social scientists and scholars they are actually applying the lens of or applying the framework of urban political ecology and studying urban waters. So, these are few works by Amita Bhaviskar 2011, and Bhaviskar had studied that how the bed of the Yamuna had actually transformed from urban commons to what she calls prized real estate commodity. So, she has studied this, captured this entire politics across the bed of the Yamuna river. So, it is all about the Yamuna river and its bed and its transformations from commons to commodity, from urban commons to a real price or a prized real estate commodity. So, there is a chapter in this particular book called Ecologies of Urbanism in India, I think 2013 publication edited by K. Shivaramakrishnan and Anne Radmacher, and there is a very interesting chapter by Coelho and Raman, and Coelho and Raman they have focused on the waterscapes of Chennai, and they have shown that how how the political economic imperatives of statecraft had actually to a great extent impacted and affected the urban waterscapes of Chennai. So, they had shown that how water bodies had been filled up for making space to housing or real estate development by the state. So, these are mainly state sponsored projects where transnational capital and private stakeholders had also came in. So, what happened is that these urban water bodies had been filled up and this had made space to real estate speculation and housing and all that. So, this is one. So, where water bodies had been actually converted, filled up and become land, this is one. Secondly, the people who had been displaced from the nearby areas, so who had to face the brunt of displacement, so they had been relocated where to some of the flood prone marshlands. So, how those marshlands now had been used as resettlement site. So, you can understand. So, one thing Chennai has done is that it had filled up its water bodies and made way to housing projects. Second thing, on the other hand, flood prone marshlands had been used as dirty, filthy, to an extent not so to an extent inhospitable areas where these people had to resettle and get relocated. And thirdly, another thing has been done, few lakes or a few water bodies actually had been desilted, dredged and beautified to make the city to an extent look clean and beautiful and all that. So, all these ideas of elite environmentalism or bourgeois environmentalism or middle class environmentalism etc. So, Raman and Coelho to a great extent had shown that how water bodies had been filled up and making way to housing projects, water bodies had been used as dirty, filthy resettlement sites, and water bodies had been dredged and silted for the purpose of beautification. So, these are the complex equations that one need to understand. So, another work by Natasha Cornea, Anne Zimmer and Rene Veron 2016 on the pondscapes of Burdban. This is also another interesting piece which talks about how muscle power, how the neighborhood dadas and how the paras and how the clubs also to a great extent contribute in the access to ponds and pond water. So, Sundaresan, Yairaj Sundaresan's work of again recent work 2017, which has been published in this particular book edited by Adriana and Pascan and all, called Urban Water Trajectories, and Sundaresan has worked on the transforming trajectories of lakes of Bangalore. So, mainly she has used the urban political ecology perspective, but she has also to an extent considered the temporal trajectory as well. So, to an extent we can say that this has converged and combined environmental history and political ecology. And finally, this is another book called Sustainable Urbanization in India, Challenges and Opportunities, which has been edited by me and which has come up this year 2018, and there we have very interesting works, two works by very young scholars doing their research at IIT Bombay, Hemant Chauhan and Neha Singh. So, Hemant Chauhan has focused on the coastal, what he calls coastal urbanism in Mumbai, and he shows that how the coastal CRZ, coastal regulation zone rules have been violated by the Mumbai metropolitan region, and what had been the effects of that violation on the fisher folks or the fishing community in Mumbai. Followed by another chapter which is the last chapter in this edited volume on the urban waterscapes of Udaipur, again a very fascinating study applying both environmental history and political ecology perspective on a so called to a great extent unexplored city called Udaipur. So, Udaipur is a very important destination today because it is a wedding destination and a lot of other things are going on, but Neha Singh draws our attention to a different area, that from where these urban so called wedding destination is trying to manage its water. So, finally, here I will end this presentation with the argument that yes, now we know, now we are aware of the contribution of urban environmental history in studying urban water. Now we are aware of the significance or the importance of political ecology to capture the complex realities of urban water. So, what is needed at this moment is we also need to convert these two perspectives, because if we integrate urban environmental history and urban political ecology, then we will able to grab a comprehensive composite picture of what is going on within the sector of urban environment during the recent days and what had happened since the past. So, yes, combining urban environmental history and urban water political ecology, we can come up with something which is known as historical urban water political ecology. So, this is the framework that I am offering you. So, as scientists also you can definitely take up this framework and study urban water, study piped drinking water facilities, study modern waste disposal system, study the drainage system, flooding system, all these systems that come under the water services in a particular city, and understand the nuances and nitty-gritties involved in it. Yeah, so these are the references, and so I think in one of my lectures, in one of my last lectures, I will elaborate on how I am trying to apply or use historical urban water political ecology by focusing on a particular case study on Kolkata's urban water systems, which I have connotated as blue infrastructure, but for now you go through some of these important references and try to understand the importance of social sciences framework in understanding urban waters in the contemporary period and how it had evolved since the past. Thank you.